Good morning. It is fantastic to be here, and I thank Andrea and Christine and the whole team for this very kind invitation to come here and have a chat in the morning. Now, the thing was that Andrea knows that I'm from the capital of the winey belt, Örebro. So she said, it is probably better for you to speak in English, because so that is actually the reason, yeah. Apart from that also, even though I've been working with international public procurement for 27 years now, I think it is, I don't think I've ever had a presentation in Swedish, so it feels a little bit easier. Anyway, I'm here to talk about the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and to start with, I obviously want, and also about the procurement activities that we are conducting in the bank, or let's say under the projects of the bank, because what we are talking about is not the procurement that we are doing for the bank, but actually in the projects that we are financing. Now, just to point out a few things in the beginning, and that is to allude to what we are not. We are not the European Investment Bank. European Investment Bank is a financial instrument of the EU, subject to EU law. We are not subject to EU law. We work a lot with our friends in the European Investment Bank, but we are the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The one thing that we have in common, though, is that we do have the word European in the bank, or in the title of the bank. However, when it comes to our bank, it is not actually that European at the end of the day. Because to start with, we have, as you can see from here, we are owned by 67 countries and 2 institutions. And if you start to count the EU countries, you very quickly realize that someone else must be involved here. And that means that we have ownership from countries like United States, Korea, Australia, Japan, etc. So there is a lot of interest in the bank from outside the European Union. And also, let's say like this, we were set up initially to support the new countries that came up after the fall of the Soviet Union. Whilst most of those countries are maybe considered sort of European, Central European, Eastern European, etc., some of them were initially not European. And we do have our headquarters in London. But as you know, our English friends have decided that not even London is no longer in Europe. So, we are losing our European touch somehow. When it comes to investments, we are doing approximately about 9 billion a year. It's been roughly steadily going slightly upwards. And if you compare again with European Investment Bank, you have to add another 0, because they are roughly now about 90 billion a year. So we are, in comparison with them, a very small bank. And they are also one of the owners of the bank. So the 2 institutions is the European Investment Bank and the EU. We have a total capital base of 30 billion, which is not all paid in capital, but this is what we can draw upon as needed. Now, if you compare with most of the other development banks, they have poverty alleviation as one of the most core objectives of their banks. You don't see any of that in our bank. What we are talking about is predominantly to promote transition to market economies by investing mainly in the private sector. And actually, most of what we are doing as a bank is actually in the private sector. Actually, around 70% of our investments are in the private sector. And this is a map showing where we are operating, and those countries which are up to 29, Uzbekistan, those are the traditional countries that we were set up to support. And then you can see the other ones which have been added later, which are Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Morocco, Tunisia, West Bank and Gaza, Cyprus, Greece, Russia, not Russia, Turkey is one of those that we have added later. The last one which has joined us is Lebanon, which joined just a half a year ago, really. I've been trying 2 times to get there, but I had to cancel both trips because of security. I don't know how we are going to do work there, if that is going to continue like that. So 30% of what we are doing are in the public sector, and predominantly that's the area where we are focusing our attention on in the procurement function of the bank. We are approximately 25 people that are supporting our clients with all the procurement activities that they are doing. We are very much hands-on in what we are doing. And we have a procurement policy and advisory department, which consists of people like me with either gray hair or no hair at all, basically meaning that they've been around for quite some while. All of us have been out in the field working with implementation of projects. We have also worked in the bank supporting clients from the bank side, and after that we've started to work in the policy department. Because whilst the bread and butter of what we are doing is to make sure that our projects are doing well, are implemented in the way that we would like them to be implemented, we also have a number of other policy-related activities, which I'm going to come back to. So, we are, as I said, not subject to EU law. And when it comes to procurement rules, we have our own procurement rules. And just to point out a few things about these pictures here. These are sort of representatives of the types of contracts that we are involved in. You see this is the bridge there is the Sava Bridge in Belgrade. The shelter is the Chernobyl shelter, which was actually one of the biggest contracts, one single contract that we have financed over the years. It's a fantastic, magnificent shelter. It's so big that you can actually more or less slide it in over Wembley Stadium. It's really impressive to look at it. Yeah. And another big contract is the St. Petersburg flood barrier, the one in the middle, which is helping St. Petersburg to survive when there is a high tide and a lot of influx of water coming into the bay. And then typically this on the right side represents air traffic control and water and wastewater. So these are typical projects that we are involved in. We are, let's say, 2016, we supported our clients with placing contracts for about 2.6 billion. And that is, I would say, it was a good year. Normally, I would say it's around 2 billion. But 2016, we had a very big project in Ukraine, which supported the procurement of gas. And that's topped up a little bit on our statistics. So predominantly we are involved in works contracts. One thing which I'm very happy about is that our rules are working very well from the point of view that they are supporting cross-border tendering. And our statistic on cross-border tendering is 54%. And I saw the latest from the EU was 1.8. So slightly better. Yeah. Even though that's obviously not the full truth, because obviously the type of contracts that we are involved in promotes great international interest. Yeah. 97% of the tenders that we are supporting are procured through open tendering procedures, which means that it's open for anyone, even those firms which are not from countries that are member states of the bank. So it's open to anyone. And we have, on average, about 3.6 tenders per contract. So statistics is actually looking fairly good. Yeah? Our rules, which are based on the same key principles as the EU rules, economy, efficiency, non-discrimination, transparency, and accountability. Now, the question is obviously, why do we have our own rules? What's the point? Why not use national procedures and try to have an, let's say, oversight and support clients with the procedures that they are used to? Well, to start with, when the bank was established in '91, let's say the clever people that set up the bank, they wrote the agreement establishing the bank, and they were very foresighted in that because they did put in a language related to what type of procurement that the bank should support. And it says that the agreement established in the bank requires completely open procurement and not procurement open only to members, based on international tendering where appropriate, and such tenders should be generally competitive in line with the GATT agreement on government procurement. Later on, World Trade Organization GPA agreement, obviously. So these are the sort of the fundamental principles for all the activities that we are doing in the procurement sector. And the procurement rules, which derives from this wording and the thinking of the people who established the bank, reflects those ideas. But also, at the end of the day, when, let's say, when the bank was set up to support our new countries in the former Eastern Bloc, I myself, I came to work very early in the early 90s to work in our countries of operations. And at that time, there were no national procurement laws, at least to talk about of the type of standards that we would like to see. So having our own rules was very important. And another thing which might be interesting for you is that in those days, in the early 90s, even into 2000, all the contracts that were placed, both under World Bank financing, EBRD financing, etc., were all placed in accordance with other laws except for the national law. Very often Swedish law, because it was considered that the arbitration rules here in Sweden and the courts were working very well, or English law. So most of the contracts were, or let's say all of the contracts were placed in accordance with foreign laws. That has changed. Today, most of the contracts, or I would say predominantly all of the contracts, are placed in accordance with national contract law. And I think this is, for us, let's say working in development banks, this is a very important distinction when we're looking at the implementation of the contracts. It also makes it slightly more difficult for us during implementation, because obviously when it is, let's say the governing law is the national law, us as a bank have very much more difficulties in getting, let's say, supportive and involved during the implementation when it comes to the legal aspects. So another thing is that many countries in our region are still updating our laws, or their laws. Some of them are updating the laws actually on a couple of times per year. It's a lot of changes. So once you do an assessment of one law, you go home and you write your report about it, and they already changed the law. So then you have a problem in order to assess actually, is that law acceptable to us or not? Another thing which is very important is that we have people representing countries which are putting in your money into the bank. And they are obviously very keen ensuring that companies from their home countries have at least an equal opportunity to participate in the tenders. They want to make sure that also their own interests are being satisfied in terms of being able to get contracts. And having our own rules, which are transparent, which ensures that we as a bank can have a proper oversight of the procurement procedures, is very important, because that is not a 100% guarantor that things are going swimmingly well, but it makes it possible at least to be involved. So other examples of where we as development banks, not only EBRD, but where the other banks are having concerns with national law. I'm sure that you know that there have been, for at least the last 15 years, there's been a lot of discussion about that the development banks should entrust the clients in our countries of operations to use their own procedures, use of country systems, as has been called. And this has been going on for over 15 years. It was decided that it was going to hand over more. But in fact, whilst the World Bank put in a lot of resources in this, 15 years after, there are only two, or let's say one country, which is Mauritius, and one region in India, which has been allowed to use their own country system. So question is then, what are the problems? Are the laws that bad? Well, no. At the end of the day, there are many good laws out there, but there are many other things which affect you. Such as, for instance, the primary law may look very good, but then all of you find that in the bylaws you have things which affects the procurement, such as, for instance, that there are local preference schemes hidden in other laws, and that is something that we as banks have difficulties in accepting. Another thing is that in many countries, and this is getting a bigger and bigger problem by the day, and that is that there are many of these kind of domestic politically motivated debarment lists. If you take, let's say, Ukraine, for instance, which we are focusing a lot on, they have a debarment list which is expanding by the day, and obviously we find that there are a lot of Russian companies and Russian individuals on this, where it's very clear that not all of them are there because of being involved in fraud and corruption or doing poor implementation of projects. There may be other reasons. Turkey, you may know that before the coup there were a blacklist or a debarment list, which was about 3,500 individuals and firms. Today, I think we are soon getting up to 50,000. And these are very difficult things for us as banks to deal with, because at the end of the day, we are supposed to be open, and the only let's say, eligibility requirement is that you should be capable of performing under the contract, meaning you should have the experience, you should have the financial muscles, etc., to be able to perform under the contract. Another thing is that if you take Kazakhstan as an example, very nice primary law. It looks not bad at all, but if you look at bylaws, there is a 50% mandatory local requirement embedded in that, which again makes it very difficult for us because it should be open. Yeah? Another thing is that practices can sometimes put a spanner in the work. E-procurement is actually much more developed in our countries of operations than it is in the EU. You have e-procurement almost everywhere. But when you start to look at it, how it works, you can have, for instance, just as an example, the digital signatures that are required, you can only obtain if you are established in that country and if you have operated for a certain period and with a certain volume, which again makes it very difficult from a practical point of view to have a clearly open international competition. Also statistics, that even though some countries have very good e-procurement systems, and the statistics from that looks fantastic. We have very high open tendering rate, etc., etc. But again, when you start to look outside what's going on in the e-tendering system, you find, for instance, in some countries they don't even include all the direct contracting, which, if you start to compare, is equally many as the open tenders. So you have to drill down, and you find, if you do drill down, you find a lot of problems. Another thing with using our own rules is these stringent procurement rules, as the banks are perceived to have. They are, let's say, developed as a result of previous experience and criticism of corruption and misuse of funds. So the question is, are our countries faring better now when they have better legal system, better procurement laws, etc.? Now, you were referring to Transparency International before, and was this very colorful map could be sort of seen as a first glance as looking at which were the old socialistic states in red and etc. But that's not really the point with this map. This is showing it's the index of the corruption perception. Yeah. And very clearly, if you look at this map and compare it with the map where we are operating, most of the countries where we are operating are in the red, which means that our oversight, our rules do play a very important role when it comes to trying to stem any opportunities for fraud and corruption. It will always be there, unfortunately, but we can do our best to try to minimize the opportunities. So question is then, how do we do that? Well, a few things. There are many things that we do, but in terms of just looking at the procurement process, we do basically the same way as any other multinational development bank. We have our standard tender documents, which means that there is a set of procedures which are representing the policies that we have said that needs to be followed. As a bank, we review all the key stages in the procurement process, from basically the design of the project, because in the design you can also find a lot of, design flaws, which makes it impossible for countries to participate. So our involvement in the design of the project is very important. And previous speaker was also mentioning the importance of the early stages, which I think is one of the keys. We do provide implementation support. Almost every one of our projects are also coming with a consultant attached to it. And this third-party consultant being involved is a good way for us to at least have a finger in the eye of our client to make sure, be careful, there's another guy here watching you during the implementation. And that is for us very useful, apart from that they provide, let's say, specific expertise. But when it comes to the engineering part, etc., our countries of operations have fantastic engineers, really good ones. So that is probably not the only reasons. But when it comes to procedures, how you work with the bank, etc., it is very useful to have a consultant involved. We are very restrictive when it comes to direct contracting. We do, from time to time, allow direct contracting. That is predominantly when there are things like upgrade of an air traffic navigation system, for instance, where we know that trying to go out with an open tender and maybe end up with a different supplier from the previous one can cause much more problems than actually benefits. Or if there has been an unsatisfactory, let's say, outcome of an open tender process, we might agree on a direct contracting. We are very restrictive on negotiations. None of our processes involves actually negotiations with contractors. But we have other procedures which involves iterative contact and ability to sit down and discuss technical solutions, as long as money is not on the table. Because once the money is on the table, that's where things starts to get a little bit pear-shaped when it comes to fraud and corruption. We are very restrictive when it comes to the use of evaluation criteria. We don't accept, for instance, merit point system unless there are any particular reasons for this, such as that it is very difficult to go into detail and specify all the things that you want to have. That doesn't mean that we are advocating what normally is referred to as looking at the lowest cost only. Not at all. There are many other ways of doing very good procurement and achieving value for money, even not using merit point system. Merit point system is almost exclusively, if you start to look at it, enabling subjective judgment. And the moment you put in subjective judgment into an evaluation, you also open up for a possibility to choose just the one you want to have rather than you should have. So that's why we are very restrictive of that. We do, let's say, independent reviews during and after contract implementation. Every year we have 2 independent audits of projects where we have identified that something is not smelling right here, and we need to have an extra check to find out if everything has been done actually in the way that we really intended it to be done. We also have, as actually the only bank, we have a very stringent complaints process. And we have a complaints committee in the bank, which is not totally independent from the bank. It is actually people in the bank. But all these people who are in the complaints mechanism none of them are involved actually in procurement, let's say the procurement area. So it means basically it's the general legal counsel, it's a representative from our risk office, and it's also representatives from our integrity office. So those are key players when it comes at looking at complaints, making sure that not only let's say the relationship with the client and the contractor has been done in a correct way, but also that we have done our job in a proper way here. So the bread and butter of what we are doing is to support our clients when it comes to the projects. But we're also doing a lot of other things in the area of policy dialogue with our countries of operations. And with those countries where we have key specific issues and where we think it would be very important for us to have a more engaged dialogue, we sign a memorandum of understanding. And we have that with those countries where we have a lot of public sector activities, which means that we are going in with specific targeted, let's say, policy support, which we do, for instance, through engaging civil society in oversight of the procurement system in Ukraine. In Ukraine, we also helped out with the construction sector reform program, which we find if we can manage to help to take away a bit of the red tape that is we can find in the construction sector, we can help the implementation substantially in Ukraine. We work in Serbia, where we are helping with enhancing the complaint system, and we work with capacity building in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we also work on corruption, which we do through our cooperation with OECD Anti-Corruption Network. We have 8 of our countries of operation, which we are now constantly working with, both doing in-country mission, and I emphasize that we work with them. It's not like we are coming in and saying how to do. We work with them to try to establish better processes in the country. Another thing we are doing, let's say in Romania, we worked with the water sector, where we have engaged the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, as they're called now, to help companies in the water sector to achieve SIPS certification, which means basically that at the end of the day, when they have received the certification, they can say that we have the same good system as Coca-Cola when it comes to procurement. Yeah? We also work in joint ventures, and one joint venture we have is the internal joint venture, where we work with our legal transition team in order to support our countries to improve their legal standard in procurement. And that includes 2 external joint ventures. One with the UNCITRAL, which, as you probably know, have the model law on procurement. And together with UNCITRAL, we are with those countries which are willing to work with us. We help them to move up the legal standard to comparison with the model law on procurement. And if they have been able to do so, then we can kick out in the next joint venture which we have, which is with the World Trade Organization GPA, which means that if you have a standard in line with the model law, you also have the prerequisites to be able to access the GPA. And we can help out both with gap analysis, with the capacity building, and the negotiation process to become a GPA member. And we also work on professionalization, which I will come back to. But here, just very quickly about the EBRD GPA TC facility, where we, as you can see here, these are the countries that we've been supporting so far and those that we are working with. Ukraine joined 2016, and Moldova joined, Montenegro has joined, all of them supported by our efforts in EBRD. And you can see the other countries that we are working with also. Another thing which we are working with, which I am very happy with, and I really like this, and this is that we set up together with the University of Tor Vergata a couple of years ago an international master in public procurement management. And the whole idea with this is that we have taken, if you know Gustavo Piga, he's a well-known person in the academic world on procurement. He is running this university, and he's been running a masterclass, an Italian version of a masterclass. And we took that one and we looked at it together with Gustavo and did the changes that we thought were necessary from an MDB point of view or an EBID point of view, because it's our initiative. And we are supporting already established procurement professionals in our countries of operations, those who are working in complaints authorities, competition authorities, in the public procurement authorities, to come to Tor Vergata and get a dose of best practice during 1 year and achieve a master in public procurement management. This involves 4.5 months on campus in Tor Vergata, and the good thing with that is that you also then, because they're spending so much time together, you are creating a very natural network of procurement professionals in the countries of operations, which know each other and use each other on a daily basis to resolve problems over the borders. Not only that, during the 5 years that we have been running this program, we have actually achieved 4 marriages. So if any one of you are singleton out there, I would recommend to go to this masterclass. It works very well. Yeah. So this is the masterclass of 2017, and we have just set up a satellite of this, which is in Belgrade, with the aim of trying to cover the Balkan region. The difference is that they don't need to stay on campus. They can actually come for extended weekends and do the master in Belgrade. And with that, I will just finish by saying that as in all competition, you can only win if you participate. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you.